You ever have one of those days where the universe seems determined to ruin your perfectly mediocre afternoon? I was halfway through mowing the back lawn, earbuds in, listening to an old Cold War espionage podcast, because nothing pairs with suburban landscaping like stories of Soviet betrayal, when I felt the vibration. Not from the mower, but from my phone. Motion detected, rear shed, 3:43 p.m. Now, to most folks, a shed is just a place to store aches. Maybe an old bike you swore you'd fix up one day. But mine's a bit more secure. We're talking steel-reinforced walls, military-grade padlocks, a backup generator for the alarm system, and a camera rig that'd make a mall security office jealous. After 15 years in army logistics, and a few too many supply chain nightmares overseas, I don't trust anyone with sensitive material, except myself. And yeah, the shed's got a purpose. See, my old buddy Caleb works over at the ATF, and about a year ago, he asked me if I had space to temporarily store some non-hazardous evidence. Nothing explosive, just tech from a weapons trafficking case. The agency was relocating their facility and needed secure, off-grid storage. He sent me the paperwork. Everything legal, clean, quiet. No one needed to know. Except, apparently, someone had found out. I wiped the sweat off my brow, paused the mower, and pulled up the live feed. What I saw made me go stone still. 3 figures. On my property. In broad daylight. Standing in front of the shed. Karen Whitfield, in her signature lemon-colored sweater and power walk sneakers, was hunched over the lock like she owned the thing. Beside her was Tom Darby, the HOA's self-appointed security consultant who once tried to issue me a parking violation for backing into my own driveway. And then there was Linda, clipboard queen and professional tattletale, nervously glancing over her shoulder like she was expecting a drone strike. I zoomed in. Karen was holding bolt cutters. I said one word, loud, to no one. Idiots. I didn't even change shoes. I left the mower running and sprinted for the truck. By the time I tore out of my driveway, the live feed showed Tom already cracking the lock while Karen whispered something and gestured toward the camera like she could Jedi mind trick the lens. I don't remember the drive. I just remember the rising pressure in my chest, the kind you get when something sacred is being violated and you're not there to stop it. The shed door swung open on the screen. I saw Tom freeze. Linda backed up so fast she nearly tripped over a flower pot. And Karen? She was peering into the dark like she'd just opened the Ark of the Covenant. The bold letters stamped on each crate inside couldn't be missed: property of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. When I pulled up, I didn't slam the brakes. I didn't storm in. I walked slow, controlled. Phone recording. Sunglasses on. A hot cup of gas station coffee in hand like I was just strolling back from a Sunday market. They were still there. Frozen. Karen turned first. Her voice pitched higher than I'd ever heard it. We thought something illegal was going on. You've got government boxes. It's suspicious. I smiled. Tight. Cold. Suspicious enough to commit federal trespassing? Tom dropped the bolt cutters like they burned him. Linda gasped, clutching her chest like she'd just remembered she had won. Those crates, I said calmly, are part of an active federal investigation. And this is a crime scene now. Karen's jaw moved, but no sound came out. I continued, stepping just close enough for my camera to catch their faces. And just to clarify, those cameras? They've been recording everything, audio included. Want to hear yourselves break the lock again? Linda whimpered. Tom took a step back. But Karen, of course, tried to rally. You have no right to store federal materials in a residential neighborhood. I have documentation, I replied. You'll be seeing it soon. So will your lawyer. For a moment, I thought they'd run. But instead, Karen yanked a folded paper from her tote bag and thrust it toward me like it was Holy Writ. This is a notice. You've been inducted into the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association. Effective immediately. I stared at the paper. Then back at her. "You're trying to annex my land into the HOA, with a Word document?" She straightened her shoulders. "For the safety and harmony of the community." I took the paper, folded it once, twice, and slid it into my back pocket. "Cool. I'll be sure to hand that to the ATF when I report a break-in at a federal evidence lockup." That was the moment Karen realized she wasn't just in a neighborhood spat anymore. She was in federal territory. And she'd just kicked in the wrong door. If you thought that being caught on camera breaking into a federal evidence locker would be enough to stop someone like Karen Whitfield, then friend, you don't know Karen. The morning after her little shed invasion, I was back on my porch with Rusty, my golden retriever mix rescue, sipping strong black coffee and watching the sun rise over the silent beige rooftops of Maple Hollow. There was a certain serenity to it, until I noticed the white envelope sticking out of my mailbox, fluttering like a taunt in the wind. I wasn't expecting mail. And nobody delivers at 6:30 a.m. Curious, and already half expecting nonsense, I strolled down the driveway and pulled the envelope free. It was thick, heavier than your average HOA passive-aggressive pamphlet. Cream-colored paper, gold foil trim, and, God help me, a seal at the bottom that looked like someone had used Microsoft Word's clip art function with reckless abandon. I opened it and read, "Notice of induction. Congratulations. Following a unanimous vote from the Maple Hollow HOA Civic Council, your property at 214 Creekside Way is now formally inducted into the HOA jurisdiction. Effective immediately." I read it 3 times just to make sure my sleep-deprived brain wasn't hallucinating. They didn't even bother to hide the desperation. Unanimous vote. There is no civic council. Just Karen and her band of clipboard warriors. And induction? What was this, a secret society or a middle school club? I let out a laugh so loud it startled Rusty. Karen had officially lost the plot. I texted a photo of the letter to Caleb from the ATF with a simple caption, "She's doubling down." His response came 5 minutes later, sending this to legal. Also, who the hell tries to retroactively HOA someone? Good question. By noon, the footage from the shed break-in had already made its way through the ATF's legal chain. Caleb said they were drafting a cease and desist. And if Karen or her stooges so much as breathed near that shed again, they'd be facing obstruction charges on top of everything else. I was feeling pretty good about things, until round 2 arrived. This time, it wasn't in the mailbox. It was taped to my front door. Same ivory cardstock. Same ridiculous formatting. But this time, it wasn't a fake induction. It was a fine violation notice. Your property has been found in violation of Maple Hollow HOA standards due to the presence of an unsightly detached structure that does not conform to aesthetic guidelines. A fine of $200 has been issued. Please remit payment within 10 days. Let me repeat that. Karen fined me for the shed. The same shed she broke into. The same federally protected shed. The same shed that has security footage of her committing a felony. I stared at the notice for a solid 30 seconds. Then I sat down on my front steps and actually started laughing. I'm talking full belly. Almost tears kind of laugh. The audacity. The delusion. I wasn't even in the HOA. And here she was pretending like we were playing some kind of suburban monopoly where she could just buy up my land with fake bylaws and print her ink. But here's the thing, I knew this wasn't about bylaws. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was war. Karen had embarrassed herself in front of the entire neighborhood, and potentially the federal government, and now she was scrambling to reassert control the only way she knew how, by doubling down on fake rules and paper tyranny. So I got to work. I pulled up every document Caleb had ever sent me, the legal paperwork that confirmed my role as a temporary custodian of ATF property, the approved zoning exemption from the county, and the signed agreement outlining the conditions of storage. I even found the time-stamped building permit for the shed itself, issued back when I constructed it. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. Title, Evidence, HOA Insanity. I dropped in the break-in footage. The fake induction letter. the $200 fine notice, a screenshot of Karen's seal, and then, for good measure, I exported the audio from the security feed. The part where she whispered, "We didn't see anything. We didn't see anything. Right?" while staring directly at federal crates. That alone would send a prosecutor's eyebrows to the moon. That afternoon, I left the house for supplies. When I returned, there was another envelope waiting, this time hand-delivered by HOA enforcer Tom, who tried to pretend like we hadn't just spoken 2 days prior under very different circumstances. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mr. Hayes, we'd appreciate if you'd treat this matter with some civility. We're trying to maintain neighborhood harmony." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that before or after you cut open a federal padlock?" He flinched. I handed him a small envelope in return. "What's this?" he asked. "A little harmony of my own," I said. Inside, a USB stick labeled Exhibit A in bold red Sharpie. Let's just say Karen had no idea how bad it was about to get. 3 days after the infamous $200 shed fine, I received a formal invitation slid under my door like it was a Hogwarts letter gone rogue. Emergency HOA session, attendance required. Location, 14 Gardenia Loop, Karen Whitfield's residence. Time, 6 p.m. sharp. Purpose, address of community safety concerns. All residents, including recent inductees, are expected to attend. Recent inductee. That was rich. Karen still clung to her fantasy where she ruled Maple Hollow like a vinyl-clad monarch. And this so-called meeting? It was her grand comeback tour. She wanted a stage. And I was the unwilling headliner. But here's the thing, I didn't back down from bullies. Especially not ones holding clipboards like their weapons. So I showed up. I parked across the street. Took my time walking over. And brought a small speaker, a thermos of coffee, and a calm, very deliberate smile. The sun was setting behind the cookie-cutter rooftops of Maple Hollow, casting long shadows over driveways and flower beds trimmed within HOA-sanctioned dimensions. But tonight, things weren't going to stay so neat. Karen's garage was already open, filled with a dozen folding chairs, a table of lemonade and dry oatmeal cookies, and a whiteboard labeled in bold, "Civic Emergency Session, Unsafe Activity Review." It wasn't even branded HOA anymore. She was trying to rebrand mid-collapse. I took a seat in the back corner. People nodded at me. Some nervously. Some curiously. Karen stood at the front in a coral blazer and pearls, dressed like she was about to moderate a presidential debate at a craft fair. On her left was Tom, stiff as a board. On her right, Linda held a clipboard and avoided eye contact. Karen cleared her throat and began. "There have been recent developments in our neighborhood that pose a potential threat to community safety. Certain residents," she glanced directly at me, "have been storing materials that may be hazardous." She reached behind her, pulled out a foam board poster, and spun it around dramatically. Taped to it was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of one of the ATF crates. You could just barely make out the stenciled text, "Hazardous Content, ATF." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few neighbors exchanged worried glances. Karen smiled like she'd just unveiled the smoking gun. "These," she said, pointing, "are what's being kept less than 200 feet from our children's playground. Unmarked. Unregulated." I raised my hand. She faltered. "Mr. Hayes?" I stood slowly, keeping my voice level. "Are you aware," I said, "that what you're displaying right now is a classified image of federal evidence, taken without authorization, during an illegal entry onto private property?" Karen's face twitched. "You are distributing images of materials under the custody of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. That's not community outreach, Karen. That's a felony." Tom blinked rapidly. Linda's hand trembled as she reached for a cookie. Karen tried to recover. "I've spoken to a lawyer. And, perfect." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and tapped speaker. "Hey Derek," I said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You free?" A crisp voice echoed through the speaker. "Hey Jackson. Just got out of legal review. And guess what, we're issuing a cease and desist. Effective immediately. If anyone touches that shed again, or distributes classified imagery, it's obstruction of justice. Federal level. The room went dead silent. Derek continued, unfazed. Also, we've flagged your HOA for formal review. If that footage gets out again, your neighbor Karen might find herself answering to someone a little higher up than the Maple Hollow Flower Committee. Someone gasped. Karen turned a full shade paler. I hung up the call and let the silence settle. Then I turned to the crowd. Anyone else have questions about what's stored in my shed? Because the ATF will be happy to provide clarification, with subpoenas if needed. For the first time in HOA history, Karen had nothing to say. The crowd started shifting. Quiet conversations sparked in corners. People looking around like they were seeing the HOA for the first time, not as a structure of order, but as a mechanism of unchecked power. And now, they'd watched that power get slapped across the face by a federal agency. I stood up and started to leave. As I passed Karen, I leaned in just enough and said softly, next time you call a tribunal, maybe don't commit 3 felonies first. I left her standing there, silent, surrounded by the remnants of her suburban empire. By the next morning, the whispers had started. The HOA wasn't sacred anymore. The clipboard revolution had a crack in its foundation. And I was just getting started. You ever watch a dam break? Not in the dramatic Hollywood kind of way, but slowly, hairline cracks appearing one at a time, until the whole thing just gives. That was what it felt like, watching Karen's HOA empire crumble. It started the morning after the garage debacle. I was sitting in my home office, sipping coffee and organizing my evidence folder, now creatively titled Operation HOA-geddon, when I decided it was time to go on offense. I wasn't going to wait for another fake violation or mysteriously appearing surveillance notice. No. It was time to dig into the root of the madness, the HOA's authority itself. So I called Greg. Greg's a real estate attorney with the charm of a bulldog and the tenacity of a caffeine-addicted bloodhound. He's the kind of guy who doesn't say much at first, just flips through paperwork with surgical focus until he finds the weak spot. I handed him everything: the fake induction letter, the bogus HOA vote, the aesthetic fine, and most importantly, the suspicious amendment Karen had filed claiming to expand the HOA's jurisdiction to include my property. Greg whistled low. "This isn't just wrong," he said. "It's fraudulent. And poorly done at that." Apparently, the expansion document had been filed at the county clerk's office nearly 2 years ago, buried between pages of community development permits. It wasn't signed by any municipal authority. No vote had occurred. No legal description matched my parcel. It was, in short, a forged attempt to rope me, and potentially others, into HOA control without consent or process. But that wasn't the only bombshell. Turns out, once you find one lie, others start surfacing like roaches when the lights come on. Greg requested a full audit of the HOA's charter and bylaws. And that's when we discovered something juicy, a clause in the original HOA founding documents that explicitly prohibited expansion of jurisdiction without a supermajority community vote and county verification. Karen had violated her own rules. And she'd done it quietly, banking on no one ever reading the fine print. So I did what any concerned neighbor would do. I printed out the original boundary plat map, highlighted my property, and made 20 color copies. Then I walked Rusty around the neighborhood and dropped one into each mailbox. On the front, in bold, "If they lie to me, who else did they lie to?" Turns out, quite a few. 2 days later, I heard a knock. Not one of Karen's cronies this time, but Nancy. Nancy was a retired CPA who lived 2 blocks down. Quiet, kind, knitted on her porch most afternoons. But now, she looked like a woman on a mission. "I kept every HOA newsletter for the past 5 years, she said without introduction. "There are discrepancies in the landscaping fund reports. And I've seen 3 different totals listed for the community improvement fund. That's not normal. I invited her in. An hour later, we had spreadsheets, highlighters, and Nancy's giant green binder spread across my kitchen table. We compared outgoing payments, vendor names, invoice dates, and budget allocations. What we found made my blood run cold, and Nancy's run hot. There were repeated payments to a consulting firm with no public business license, landscaping charges in winter months, and then the kicker, a series of checks written to cash, all signed off by Karen. Over $12,000 had vanished in the past 2 years. We weren't the only ones noticing. 3 days after our spreadsheet session, Mr. Richards, yes, the soft-spoken man with the bird feeders and cow-shaped weather vane, stood up at the next community meeting. Uninvited. Karen had gathered her usual suspects. Folding chairs. Lemonade. But the energy was different. Nervous. Tight. Richards walked to the front holding a single piece of paper. "I've served as treasurer for this HOA for 10 years, he said. Voice steady. "And for 5 of those years, I've been told not to ask questions. But now, I have answers." He placed the paper on the table in front of Karen. It was a bank statement. Not from the official HOA account, but from a separate one labeled, Maple Hollow Civic Wellness Fund. And the withdrawals? Not for pool maintenance. Not for community events. But for things like executive travel, home office supplies, and administrative reimbursements. All tied back to one person, Karen Whitfield. The room went silent. Then came the anger. I paid into that. Where's the community art project? Why were we charged for new landscaping when nothing changed? Karen tried to slam her gavel. Yes, she had a gavel, but it was too late. Nancy calmly walked to the front and opened her binder. "I have 27 discrepancies. Would you like me to read them alphabetically or chronologically?" Karen stood up, hands shaking. "This meeting is over." But the neighbors were already standing too. It wasn't a meeting anymore. It was an uprising. 3 days later, Greg filed an official complaint with the county. Attached, fraudulent filings, financial inconsistencies, and signed witness statements. A week later, Karen got served, by a zoning officer. No less, while she was on her morning patrol measuring someone's grass with a ruler. The final nail came in an email from the county: "The Maple Hollow HOA charter is hereby declared void. All associated accounts are frozen. Board dissolved. Authority rescinded." And just like that, the clipboard queen was dethroned. You'd think that getting your entire HOA dissolved by the county and having your financial misdeeds aired like dirty laundry at a church picnic would be enough to humble a person. But this was Karen Whitfield we were talking about. Not even public humiliation, frozen bank accounts, or being served by a zoning officer during her grass measuring patrol could stop her. Because exactly 1 week after the HOA was officially disbanded, I found a new flyer taped to my door. It was printed on that same expensive ivory paper she loved, complete with gold foil headers and a logo that looked suspiciously like a bad wellness brand from the early 2000s. At the top, it read, "The Briarwood Civic Wellness Committee, because harmony is a choice." Oh. She rebranded. Karen wasn't just back, she'd reinvented herself. No more HOA titles. No more legal authority. Just suggestions. Strong ones. And yet, attached to the flyer was a notice of concern. "Excessive mechanical activity has been observed near your property. Please be mindful of community serenity. Your power drill was heard at 7:42 a.m. She was policing drill noise now. That would have been laughable, if it wasn't for what I noticed the next morning. I was drinking coffee on the back patio, flipping through the news, when something in the tree line caught my eye. A faint glint. Barely noticeable. But I'd seen reflections like that before. Military-grade lenses. Surveillance optics. I put Rusty on a leash and walked the perimeter like it was a routine check. 20 minutes later, I found it, a small, camouflaged camera tucked into the tree canopy. pointed straight at my shed. It was transmitting via Wi-Fi. SSID name, wellness_HQ. I didn't even need a map to know where the signal was coming from. Karen's house. She'd installed unauthorized surveillance equipment aimed at a structure holding ATF-registered federal evidence, despite being under an active cease and desist order. And the best part? She didn't stop there. Over the next 48 hours, I got reports from neighbors that Karen had emailed grainy stills of the ATF crates, yes, again, to a mailing list titled Neighborhood Integrity Watch. She even posted a community alert on a barely functioning website that included photos of the shed, complete with the ATF labels still visible. So I made a call. Derek answered on the first ring. "Jackson," he groaned, already sounding exhausted. "Tell me she didn't post them again." "She didn't just post them," I replied. "She distributed them, surveilled a federal storage site, and is now claiming to be head of something called a Civic Wellness Committee." Dead silence. Then a quiet exhale. "I'll notify legal," he said. "But this time, we're not letting it go with just a warning." A week passed. Then came bunko night. If you've never been to a suburban bunko night, picture a wine-fueled dice game where gossip flows faster than Moscato. Karen had invited the entire neighborhood to her house, likely her last attempt at rallying support before the federal hammer dropped. I wasn't invited, obviously, but Ted was. Ted's the kind of neighbor who lives for moments like this. Half-retired, full-time nosy, and owns a drone for weather photography. At 8:12 p.m., I got a text. "Ted, she just said we must reclaim order. It's officially a cult now." "Ted, wait. Black SUVs just pulled up." "Dude." I switched to the security feed from my front camera. Sure enough, 2 unmarked SUVs and a government sedan were rolling up Karen's driveway with the smooth, silent efficiency of people who've done this before. Ted's final text came at 8:20 p.m. She just opened the door with a wine glass in her hand. Then she screamed. What followed was, by all accounts, a spectacular implosion. 3 agents entered her home, calm, clipboard in hand. Karen's neighbors paused mid-dice roll to watch the unthinkable, the suburban tyrant finally being reined in by the feds. They didn't arrest her. They didn't need to. They confiscated her phone, her laptop, her external hard drive. They took the flyers, the mailing list, the security camera, and left her with a federal gag order so strict she couldn't even post her passive-aggressive meme without risking contempt. The next morning, her surveillance equipment was gone. Her committee Facebook page, deactivated. Her flyers, in a soggy pile on the curb, dissolving into paper mulch. And yet, as I was planting tomatoes the following afternoon, I saw her, Karen, power walking past my property. Not stepping onto it, she wasn't that dumb, but close enough that I could feel the wave of resentment radiating from her stride. She turned her head and smiled. Not a warm, apologetic smile, but the kind of smile that says, "You may have won this round, but I'm not done." I took a sip of my coffee, waved, and smiled back. Because she was right. This was just the first round. But unlike Karen, I wasn't clinging to a fake title or a paper kingdom. I had facts. I had footage. I had federal backing. And I still had the shed. So if Karen really wanted a sequel, well, let's just say, this time it wouldn't be bunko night that got ruined. It would be the rest of her life.